The viewport of the Xylothian command cruiser Vengeance of the Stars framed Earth like a blue marble suspended in absolute nothingness. Commander Vextal stood with his four upper arms clasped behind his dorsal carapace, watching the human homeworld rotate with the lazy grace of something that had no idea it was about to be conquered. "The primitive species has no idea we're here," said Subcommander Thrax, his mandibles clicking with barely contained anticipation. "Our stealth field renders us invisible to their rudimentary detection systems." Vextal's compound eyes reflected the blue-green sphere. "Their detection systems are not rudimentary, Sub-Commander. They are non-existent in any meaningful sense. They still use radio waves. Radio waves." He made a sound that was the Xylothian equivalent of a dismissive snort. "They've barely managed to put a few of their fragile biological bodies on their own moon." The bridge hummed with the quiet efficiency of a warship designed to intimidate entire star systems. The Xylothian Empire had conquered 17 civilizations in the last cycle alone. Each conquest had followed a predictable pattern: appear in orbit, demonstrate overwhelming technological superiority, demand surrender, and watch as the primitive species groveled and begged for mercy. Earth would be number 18. "The Council has authorized full subjugation protocols," Threx said, his voice carrying the reverence of a true believer. "The resources on this planet alone, the water, the minerals, the biological diversity, will fuel the Empire for generations." Vextal watched the clouds spiral over what his sensors identified as North America. There was something about this planet that made him uncomfortable, though he couldn't quite identify what. Perhaps it was the sheer audacity of the species that inhabited it. They had no right to be here. They had no right to exist at all by the Empire's standards. They were soft, fragile, and hopelessly primitive. "And yet, the humans are aware of us," Vextal said slowly. "Their telescopes have detected our approach. Their social media," he paused, consulting his translation matrix, "is apparently having what they call a collective existential crisis." "Let them panic," Threx said. "It will make the submission easier." Vextal turned away from the viewport. "Deploy the occupation fleets. Standard formation. I want every major population center covered within the hour." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as orders were transmitted across the fleet. Thousands of ships began their descent toward Earth's atmosphere, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive purple-black sheen of Xylothian military-grade plating. Commander Vextal allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The conquest of a new world was always thrilling, even when the world offered no real resistance. It was like crushing an insect, satisfying in its finality, even if the insect didn't know it was being crushed. "I want a direct channel to their global communication networks," he ordered. "Prepare the standard ultimatum. Translation will be necessary, but keep it simple. Even these primitives should understand the concept of surrender or annihilation." The city of New York had never been so quiet. Marcus Chen stood on the roof of his apartment building, one hand shading his eyes against the morning sun. The sky was wrong. That was the only way he could describe it. The sky was wrong, and everyone knew it. He could hear his neighbors murmuring on the rooftop below, their voices carrying up through the thin morning air. Someone was crying. Someone else was shouting about the end of the world. A woman in a bathrobe was chain-smoking cigarettes with the desperate intensity of someone who had given up on worrying about lung cancer. But what drew Marcus's attention was the sky itself. The clouds had begun to swirl in patterns that had nothing to do with weather. Shapes moved behind them, massive angular shapes that blocked out the sun in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The shapes were wrong. They were too geometric, too intentional. They looked like nothing nature could produce. "It's happening," said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to find his sister Alina, her face pale in the strange light. She had coffee in her hands, but she wasn't drinking it. "It's actually happening." Marcus had no words. He had spent his entire life watching sci-fi movies, reading about alien invasions, imagining what he would do if the moment ever came. He had always pictured himself as the hero, the one who took charge and saved the day. Now that the moment was here, he just felt small. "Look," Elena whispered, pointing upward. A ship had emerged from the clouds. It was enormous, so vast that it seemed to fill the entire sky. It had a design that hurt to look at, all sharp angles and darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. It hung there, silent and patient, as if waiting for something. The sound of sirens started up somewhere in the distance. A dozen different alarms, all competing for attention. Car horns blared in the streets below. Somewhere, a man was screaming. Marcus reached out and took his sister's hand. Her skin was cold. "The military has to do something," she said. "They have to have a plan." "They don't have a plan," Marcus said quietly. "Nobody has a plan. We've been worried about each other for so long that we forgot to worry about what was out there." On the bridge of the Vengeance of the Stars, Commander Vextel watched the feed from Earth's communication networks with growing fascination. The humans were reacting exactly as expected. Panic in the streets, people fleeing, looting, praying. It was the same reaction every conquered species had shown at the moment of their subjugation. The only difference was the scale of the chaos. Nearly 8 billion humans, and almost all of them were losing their minds simultaneously. "Ultimatum is ready for transmission," Threx announced. "Shall I broadcast?" "Wait," Vextel said, his attention caught by something on one of the feeds. It was a news broadcast from what appeared to be an American network. A man in a suit was speaking with visible effort to remain calm. Behind him, images of the alien ships filled the screen. Reports coming in from every major city around the globe. The objects, whatever they are, have been identified by the United Nations as. The feed cut to another image. This one showed a different part of the world. A desert landscape with people gathered in what appeared to be a religious ceremony. They were on their knees praying. Vextel had seen this before, too. The weak always turned to their primitive gods in times of crisis. But then the feed switched again, and Vextel saw something that made him pause. The image showed a group of humans in military uniform. They were standing at attention, their faces grim but determined. They weren't running. They weren't panicking. They were standing there facing the sky, ready to, what? Fight against this. "Look at them," Vextel murmured, gesturing with one of his upper arms at the screen. "These soldiers, look at their eyes." Threx leaned in, his compound eyes studying the image. "They seem resigned. They know they cannot win." "Resigned?" Vextel shook his head. "No, that's not resignation, that's something else. Something I've only seen once before." "When was that?" "On Karath Prime," Vextel said, his voice dropping low. "When the Empire conquered the Karath, they had the same look in their eyes, the look of a species that knows it's going to die but refuses to go quietly." "The Karath were different," Threx said dismissively. "They had been fighting for 3 centuries before we arrived. They had nothing to lose." "Perhaps," Vextel said, "but look at them. Look at how they stand. They're not cowering. They're not surrendering. They're standing there and their hands are on their weapons." Threx made an impatient clicking sound. "Commander, their weapons are primitive. They wouldn't even scratch the hull of a landing craft. The soldiers of this species are a joke. Their military is a joke. This entire planet is a joke." Vextel didn't respond. He was still watching the screen. The broadcast had shifted again. Now it showed another group of humans, not soldiers this time, but civilians. They were running towards something. There were bodies on the ground, debris everywhere. And then the camera panned up and Vextel saw what the humans were running from. It was one of his own landing craft. The ship had touched down in what appeared to be a large urban square. It was surrounded by humans, but they weren't attacking it. They were just standing there, watching, waiting. "Open the landing craft," Vextel ordered. I want to see their faces when the shock troops emerge." The feed shifted to a view from one of the troopers' helmet cameras. The landing craft's hatch began to open, hydraulics hissing as the thick metal door swung outward. And then the humans started screaming. Vextel watched the chaos unfold with clinical detachment. The humans scattered in every direction, their primitive instincts overriding any pretense of bravery. Mothers grabbed their children and ran. Men shoved women aside in their desperate scramble to escape. It was pathetic. It was. "Commander." The voice was sharp, urgent. Vextel spun around to face his tactical officer, who was staring at a display with an expression that, if Zalothians could be said to have expressions, looked like fear. "What is it?" "Sir, I'm picking up something, on the planet's surface, multiple somethings." "Define something." The tactical officer's mandibles were trembling. "Projectiles, sir. Thousands of them. They're coming from all over the planet, from every major continent, from the oceans even. They're heading toward our fleet." Vextel felt something cold run through his blood. "Projectiles? What kind of projectiles?" "Missiles, sir. Nuclear missiles." "Nuclear?" Vextel felt a surge of disbelief. "They're using nuclear weapons against a fleet in orbit. That's insane. The radiation alone would." "They don't care about the radiation, sir. They're launching everything they have." Vextel watched as the display lit up with thousands of incoming objects. Missiles of every shape and size, launched from land-based silos, from ships at sea, from submarines, even from aircraft that were still in the air. It was the most concentrated firepower he had ever witnessed from a primitive species. And then the first missiles began to detonate. "Full shields," Vextel roared. "All ships full shields now." The bridge rocked as the shockwaves hit. The Vengeance of the Stars was one of the most heavily shielded vessels in the Empire, but even its defenses were strained by the sheer volume of nuclear detonations. The viewport flickered, showing a maelstrom of white-hot radiation that would have vaporized anything less protected. "Damage report," Vextel shouted over the din of alarms. "Fleet ships 7 through 12 have lost shielding," his tactical officer reported. "Ships 19 and 22 are completely disabled. The nuclear radiation is. There are emergency landings happening all over the planet." Vextel stared at the display in disbelief. 2 ships had been completely disabled. 2 more were limping toward the surface with damaged engines. The humans had somehow managed to damage the fleet of the Zalothian Empire. "Sub-Commander," Vextel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Did you say they launched these missiles knowing they would create a radiation cloud that would cover their entire planet?" Threx was silent for a moment. "Yes, Commander, it appears so. They poisoned their own atmosphere, their own food sources, their own water. They launched weapons of mass destruction against our fleet, and they must have known, that it would destroy their own civilization in the process." I don't understand, Commander. Why would they do that?" Vextel turned away from the viewport. For the first time in his life, he felt something that might have been fear. "Because, Sub-Commander," he said slowly, "they would rather burn their own world to ash than let us take it." On the rooftop in New York, Marcus and Elena watched the sky light up with explosions. The nuclear detonations were visible even from the ground, brilliant flashes of white-hot light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The shockwaves had knocked out power across the city, and the silence that followed was deafening. "Is it over?" Elena whispered. Marcus shook his head. "No, it's just beginning." He could see shapes falling from the sky now. Burning debris, maybe, or ships, or something else. The shapes were getting larger as they fell, and he heard the sound of impact in the distance, a deep, rumbling crash that shook the ground beneath them. "Marcus," Elena said, her voice trembling, "what do we do?" Marcus took a deep breath. The air tasted like smoke and something else, something metallic. He looked at his sister, her face, her eyes, the fear that was written across every line of her expression. He remembered all the times they had argued, all the stupid fights they had had over the years. He remembered the last time he had seen their parents before they had moved away. He remembered everything that had made up his life, everything that had seemed so important before the sky had fallen. Now none of it mattered. "We get to the subway," he said. "We get underground, we find other survivors. He stopped. A shape had appeared in the distance, moving through the smoke and debris. It was massive, easily 15 feet tall, and it moved with the deliberate, heavy steps of something that didn't need to rush. "What is that?" Elena breathed. Marcus didn't answer. He was too busy watching the shape as it came closer. It was humanoid, but only vaguely so. Its body was covered in armor that gleamed with a sickly purple-black sheen. It had 4 arms, each one ending in a clawed hand that looked like it could tear through steel. Its head was elongated, with compound eyes that reflected the light of the burning city. "Run," Marcus said. "Elena, run." But it was too late. The creature had seen them. The Zalothian trooper was designated Unit 749. It had no name because it had never needed one. It had been bred and trained for one purpose: to conquer primitive species and enforce the will of the Empire. It had seen many species in its time. Some had fought back. Some had begged for mercy. Some had done both. But none of them had ever done what these humans had done. None of them had ever launched their own missiles at their own planet just to try to destroy the Empire's fleet. Unit 749 reached the rooftop where the 2 humans were standing. It raised one of its weapons, the barrel gleaming with cold efficiency. And then it paused. The humans were not running. They were not screaming. They were standing there facing it, their hands clenched at their sides. The male human was shielding the female with his body. His eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too. Something that Unit 749 had not seen in a long time. Defiance. "Hey," the human said. He spoke in a language that Unit 749's translator immediately processed. "Hey, you ugly son of a bitch." Unit 749 tilted its head. "Your species is conquered," it said, the words coming out in a flat, mechanical tone. "Surrender and you will be allowed to live." The human laughed, actually laughed. It was a bitter sound, hollow and broken, but it was unmistakably a laugh. "You don't get it," the human said. "You really don't get it." "Get what?" The human took a step forward. His hands were still at his sides, but Unit 749 could see them trembling. It could smell the fear on him. And yet... "Congratulations," the human said, his voice cracking slightly. "You've declared war on humanity." Unit 749 didn't understand. "What is the significance of this declaration? Your species is primitive. Your weapons cannot." "We don't need weapons," the human said. "We have something better." "What?" The human smiled. It was a terrifying expression, all teeth and desperation. "We have nothing left to lose." Commander Vextol watched the tactical display with growing unease. The humans had stopped launching nuclear missiles. That was the good news. The bad news was that they had switched to something else, something far more dangerous in its own way. They had started hunting. The Zalothian fleet had managed to recover some of its disabled ships, but the ground campaign was going badly. The humans had retreated from the major cities, disappearing into the wilderness where the Empire's sensors couldn't track them. They had learned to move silently, to hide in shadows, to strike with a speed and ferocity that caught even the most experienced troops off guard. "We've lost contact with Unit 749, Threx reported. It was on a patrol in the area formerly known as New York. Its last transmission indicated it had encountered 2 human civilians on a rooftop. And nothing, the transmission cut off. The unit's tracking signal is gone." Vextol felt that cold sensation again. "Send another unit to investigate." "Sir, I've sent 3 units already. None of them have reported back. The bridge was silent. Vextel stared at the display, watching the blinking dots that represented his troops. There were fewer of them now than there had been an hour ago, fewer than there had been a day ago. The humans were not just resisting, they were winning. How? Vextel demanded. How are they doing this? They're primitives. Their weapons are. Their weapons are surprisingly effective, Commander. Threx's voice was strained. They've been adapting, using our own technology against us, ambushing patrols, destroying supply lines. They're fighting a guerrilla war and they're winning. Vextel turned away from the display. He had seen guerrilla warfare before. He had seen primitive species try to fight back against the Empire's overwhelming technological superiority. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were enjoying it. "Show me the footage," Vextel ordered. "Show me what they're doing to our troops." Threx hesitated. "Commander, I don't think." "I said show me." The display flickered, and Vextel watched as the screen filled with images of human violence. It was brutal. It was savage. It was unlike anything he had ever seen from a primitive species. A group of humans ambushed a patrol of shock troops in a forest. They used weapons made from the Empire's own fallen soldiers, laser rifles and plasma cannons, modified to fire with even greater power. They moved with perfect coordination, communicating in short, sharp bursts of sound that were almost impossible to intercept. They weren't afraid. That was the thing that struck Vextel most of all. These humans had seen their cities burn. They had seen their loved ones die. They had been told again and again that resistance was futile. And yet they weren't afraid. They were angry. "Commander," Threx said, his mandibles clicking nervously, "there's something else you should see." "What?" Threx manipulated the controls, and the display shifted to show a different feed. This one came from a distant satellite, focusing on a region that the humans called the Middle East. The image showed a massive human army, thousands of soldiers moving across a desert landscape. "They're gathering for a counterattack," Vextel said. "They intend to push us back to the landing zones." "Yes, Commander, but that's not the important part." "What is the important part?" Threx zoomed in on the human soldiers. "Look at their faces, Commander. Look at their eyes." Vextel leaned closer to the display. The human soldiers were marching in formation, their weapons held at the ready. They were grim. They were determined. But they were also. "They're happy," Vextel breathed. "They're actually happy." "Yes, Commander, they've been like this since we landed. It's as if—" Threx paused, struggling to find the right words. "It's as if they've been waiting for this. Their entire existence has been leading up to this moment, this war, this fight, this opportunity." Vextel felt something shift in his understanding. He had been wrong about the humans, so terribly wrong. He had seen their primitive technology and their chaotic society and had assumed they were weak. He had seen their infighting and their contradictions and had assumed they were divided. But now he understood. The humans had never been divided. They had just been waiting. "Send a message to the Council," Vextel said quietly. "Tell them we need reinforcements. Tell them we need every ship they can spare." "Commander, the Council will never agree to." "Tell them that the humans are not what they appear. Tell them that we are losing." Threx stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and turned to his station. Vextel looked back at the display. The humans were still marching, their faces alight with an emotion that he couldn't quite identify. It might have been joy. It might have been madness. It might have been something else entirely. But whatever it was terrifying. In the ruins of New York, Marcus Chen moved through the shadows like a ghost. It had been 3 weeks since the invasion had begun. 3 weeks since he had watched his city burn. 3 weeks since he had picked up his first alien weapon and learned how to use it. He had lost track of how many Zelothians he had killed. "You're quiet tonight," Elena said from behind him. She moved with the same fluid grace that he had learned, her footsteps making no sound on the debris-strewn ground. "I'm always quiet," Marcus replied. "It's what keeps us alive." They had found others in the weeks since the invasion. Survivors, hiding in the subway tunnels and the abandoned buildings. They had formed a small community, working together to stay alive in the nightmare that their city had become. But they were running out of food, running out of ammunition, running out of time. "We need to move," Marcus said. "There's a supply depot 3 blocks north. I saw it on the last recon mission. It's lightly guarded, maybe 4 or 5 troopers." Elena nodded. "I'll get the others." Marcus watched her disappear into the shadows. He had never thought of his sister as a warrior before. She had always been the one who worried too much, who cried at sad movies, who couldn't even kill a spider without feeling guilty. But the invasion had changed her. It had changed all of them. He moved forward, his footsteps silent on the broken pavement. The city was a graveyard now, filled with the skeletons of buildings and the ghosts of lives that had been lost. But there was beauty in it too. There was a strange, savage beauty in the way the humans had refused to surrender, had chosen to fight even when fighting meant certain death. Marcus had always thought of himself as a survivor, but now he knew the truth. He was a warrior, he was a fighter, he was a human, and that meant something. It meant he would never give up. The supply depot was a converted warehouse, guarded by 5 Xylothian shock troops. Marcus counted them from the shadows, memorizing their positions and their patrol patterns. This was going to be difficult. "Plan," Elena whispered. "The same as always," Marcus replied. "We hit them hard and fast, we take what we need, we get out. And if things go wrong..." Marcus smiled grimly. "Then we make sure they go wrong for them." The attack was swift and brutal. Marcus and his team moved like shadows, striking from multiple directions simultaneously. The Xylothian troopers never stood a chance. Within minutes, the warehouse was secured. "Get the supplies," Marcus ordered. "Everything we can carry. We're leaving this city tonight." The others moved quickly, loading boxes of ammunition and food onto makeshift sleds. Marcus stood guard, watching the darkness for any sign of pursuit. "Marcus," Elena called, "you should see this." He found her standing in front of a console, her face illuminated by the glow of the display. She was staring at something, her expression unreadable. "What is it?" "It's a communication," she said. "From the alien fleet. They're calling for reinforcements. They're talking about..." She paused, reading the translation. "They're talking about extermination protocols." Marcus felt cold. "They want to destroy us." "Not just destroy us." Elena's voice was shaky. "They want to wipe us out, every last human on the planet." Marcus was silent for a long moment. He thought about everything he had lost. His home, his friends, his parents, his future. Everything that had seemed so important, so vital, was gone. But he was still here. And he was still fighting. "Good," he said. Elena stared at him. "Good, Marcus, they're going to." "I heard you, and I said good." "Why is that good?" Marcus smiled. It was a cold expression, hard and determined. "Because now we don't have to hold back." Commander Vextel had not slept in 3 days. The campaign on Earth had become a nightmare. His troops were being slaughtered by the thousands. His supply lines were being cut with surgical precision. The humans had become experts at using his own technology against him, turning the Empire's weapons into tools of their own liberation. "Commander," Threx reported, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "the reinforcements from the Council have arrived." Vextel felt a surge of hope. "How many ships?" 17, sir, all heavily armed." "Finally," Vextel breathed, "finally we can end this." But when he looked at the display, his hope turned to confusion. The 17 ships that had arrived were taking up position in orbit, but they weren't deploying their troops. They were just sitting there. Vextel said slowly. Why aren't they deploying? Threx's mandibles clicked nervously. They're waiting for orders, Commander. Then give them orders. Tell them to engage the humans. I already have, sir. They're refusing. Vextel felt something cold settle in his chest. Refusing? What do you mean, refusing? Threx pulled up a communication from the lead reinforcement ship. The Zalothian commander on the screen was visibly shaken, his compound eyes darting from side to side as if he expected to be attacked at any moment. Commander Vextel, the commander said, I have been ordered to inform you that the Council has declared a state of emergency. The human resistance has exceeded all projections. We are authorized to use any means necessary to suppress the rebellion, including orbital bombardment. Then why aren't you? Because, Commander, we have a problem. Vextel felt his heart sink. What problem? The commander paused, and Vextel could see that he was genuinely terrified. The humans have acquired the codes to our orbital defense network. They have access to our weapon systems. If we attempt orbital bombardment, they will, he paused, swallowing hard. They will use our own weapons against us. Impossible. The codes are encrypted. They couldn't possibly. They didn't need to break the encryption, Commander. They found a ship, one of ours. They salvaged the control systems and reverse-engineered the architecture. They have access to everything. Vextel felt the bridge spin around him. The humans had done what no other species had ever accomplished. They had turned the Empire's greatest strength into its greatest weakness. Threx, Vextel said quietly, tell me we have a backup plan. Threx was silent for a long moment. Then he said, there is one option, Commander. It's never been used before, but it's available to us. What is it? It's called the final solution. It involves, Threx paused as if unable to believe what he was about to say. It involves using our warships as projectiles, crashing them into the planet's surface. The kinetic energy alone would. It would destroy the planet, Vextel said. Everything on it, everything we came here for. Yes, Commander, everything. Vextel stared at the display. The humans were still fighting, still surviving, still refusing to surrender. They had taken everything he had thrown at them and had turned it back on him. They had shown him what true determination looked like. And he had never felt so completely, utterly defeated. Contact the humans, he said finally. Open a channel. Commander, they'll never accept a negotiation. They. Do it anyway. I need to speak with their leader. The communication was patched through to a human leader who called himself President Marcus Chen. Vextel had never heard of this person before, but he had to admit that the human looked impressive. He was tired, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp and unyielding. You wanted to speak with me, the human said. Let me guess, you want to surrender. Vextel felt a surge of outrage. Surrender? We are the Zalothian Empire. We have conquered 17 civilizations. And I'm impressed by the number, the human said, but you haven't conquered us, and you never will. We have more ships than you can imagine, more soldiers, more weapons. We can destroy your planet with. With what? The human interrupted. Your orbital bombardment, your final solution. We know about all of it, and we're still not giving up. Vextel was silent for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been haunting him for weeks. Why? Why do you keep fighting? You know you can't win. You know we'll eventually destroy you. Why not surrender? The human smiled. It was a terrible expression, hard and cold and utterly unyielding. Because, the human said, we would rather die free than live as slaves. Vextel opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the human cut him off. And by the way, the human added, I want you to know that you're not the first species to try this. You're not even the first species to get this far. There have been others, and they all made the same mistake you're making. What mistake? The human smile widened. You thought we were weak. You thought that because we fight each other, we can't fight together. You thought that because we're divided, we're vulnerable. Vextal felt a chill run down his spine. But you were wrong, the human continued. We've been fighting each other since the dawn of our species. We've learned every trick, every tactic, every way to hurt and kill and destroy. And now, the human leaned forward, his eyes boring into Vextal's. We're using all of that on you. Vextal stared at the human. He wanted to say something, to offer some kind of response that would reassert the Empire's superiority, but he couldn't find the words. Surrender, Commander, the human said quietly. Surrender and we'll let your people live. Vextal felt something break inside him. What about my people? He asked. What about my soldiers? They'll be treated fairly, the human said. We don't believe in slavery. We don't believe in conquest. We're not like you. We're better than you. Vextal closed his eyes. How do I know I can trust you? The human's expression softened just slightly, because you have no other choice. The surrender came 3 days later. It wasn't a grand ceremony. There were no trumpets, no fanfares, no triumphant displays of Xylothian humility. Instead, the Empire's ships simply left. They withdrew their troops from the planet, leaving behind the shattered cities and the broken bodies of those who had been lost on both sides. Marcus watched them go from the rooftop of his apartment building. The sky was blue again, clear and bright and empty of alien ships. He could hear people cheering in the streets below, their voices carrying up to him in waves of joy and relief. But Marcus didn't feel joyful. He felt tired. Marcus, Elena appeared beside him. It's over, we won. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, we won. But as he stared at the empty sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost. Something important. Something that could never be replaced. Elena, he said quietly, what happens now? His sister looked at him, her face pale and tired. Now we rebuild. We start over. We try to be better than we were before. And what if we can't? Elena took his hand. We can, we have to, because if we don't, they'll come back. And next time we might not be so lucky. Marcus squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. He thought about all the things he had lost, all the things he had given up in the fight for survival. He thought about the future and all the possibilities it held. And then he smiled. Then we build something worth fighting for. The years that followed the invasion were hard, harder than anything Marcus had ever experienced. The nuclear warheads that had been launched during the first hours of the invasion had devastated the planet. The climate had changed. The oceans had risen. The food supply had been contaminated. Millions had died in the aftermath, not from the fighting, but from the slow, grinding horror of starvation and disease. But the humans had survived, because that was what humans did. Marcus had been elected president of the remnants of the United States, partly because of his actions during the invasion, and partly because no one else wanted the job. He spent his days overseeing the rebuilding efforts, coordinating relief supplies, and trying to hold together a society that had been shattered beyond recognition. He hated every minute of it. You need to get some sleep, Elena said one evening, poking her head into his office. You look terrible. Marcus rubbed his eyes. I'm fine. You're not fine. You haven't slept in 3 days. I don't have time to sleep. We're still trying to figure out what to do with the captured Xylothian prisoners. We're still trying to rebuild the infrastructure. We're still trying to. Marcus, Elena's voice was firm, you're going to kill yourself. Marcus sighed. Maybe that would be easier. His sister walked across the room and put her hand on his shoulder. You're not allowed to talk like that. We've been through too much. We've lost too much. You're not allowed to give up now. Marcus looked up at her. She had changed in the years since the invasion. They both had. The dark circles under her eyes, the hollow cheeks, the haunted expression. They had all lost pieces of themselves, pieces that could never be replaced. I'm not giving up, he said quietly. I just don't know if we can ever be whole again. Alina squeezed his shoulder. We will be, it'll just take time. But Marcus wasn't sure they had time. The alien ships that had been captured during the invasion were a goldmine of information, revealing the Zalothian Empire in all its terrifying glory. They had discovered that the Empire was massive, spanning hundreds of star systems, and that the invasion of Earth had been nothing more than an expeditionary force. The real fleet was still out there, waiting, and it was only a matter of time before they came back. The Zalothian fleet descended like a swarm of locusts, thousands of ships filling the sky with their dark, angular shapes. They were everywhere, blotting out the sun, casting shadows across the devastated planet. Marcus stood on the surface of the moon, watching the attack through a telescope. He could see the ships moving in perfect formation, their weapons glowing with cold fire. President Chen, a voice called out. We have contact from the colony. They want to know what to do. Marcus lowered the telescope. Tell them to hold their positions. We're not going to run this time. But President, we can't possibly. Tell them, Marcus interrupted. We're not running. The communications officer looked uncertain, but she nodded and hurried away. Marcus returned his attention to the telescope. The Zalothian ships were getting closer, their weapons preparing to fire. Marcus, Alina said, appearing beside him, what are you doing? Marcus smiled grimly. I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. I'm standing my ground. Standing your ground? Alina's voice was incredulous. Marcus, there are thousands of them. We can't win. We don't have to win, Marcus said. We just have to make them understand. Understand what? Marcus turned to face his sister. Understand that we're not afraid, that we're not going to break, that we will fight them until the end of time. Alina stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Fine, she said, then I'll stand with you. Marcus smiled. That's all I ask.